Hey everybody, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to do another episode of Druid Civilization and Culture. My name is Druid Nicholas Clan, founder of the Druid Circle, Druid Order of Blessed Stone and Wood, and Druid University. I hope everybody is doing well. We In this video, I want to talk specifically about Druids and Socioeconomics. And I think that this is an important topic to discuss because if we fail to talk about this, then we really can't get into the meat and potatoes of what the Druids would have experienced and how they would have seen their world, right? And so this is a really important subject because we don't really talk much about this, and there's so much out there on magic and whatnot, and we do a lot of that. But I do a lot of those videos too. But I also wanted to do Druid Civilization and Culture because some people might not necessarily be into that whole magic or tergy. So let's begin. All right. I want to first say that a little point that the when we talk about the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, okay, it's very important to understand that the Bronze Age and the Bronze Age would have covered the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. A lot of people call it sometimes Iron Age 1 and Iron Age 2. Iron Age 1 was toward the mid to end part of the Bronze Age. It's Iron Age 1, and Iron Age 2 was actually the official Bronze Age. So when we talk about these names, it's very hard to kind of pinpoint and understand what things actually were. And that's why I like to kind of clarify that for you guys. So when we talk about the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, that's where we're at. Okay. So I want to talk about this because again, it's fairly decently important. So these ages, okay, and when I see it, I guess in my head, I see it as these socioeconomic sort of layers, if you will, stratification. And the stratification was was actually done on purpose. It was done on purpose so that each level, each strata, okay, of a socioeconomic level, right, to get to the very top, each level would have been designed to develop itself so much so that the entire system, the entire socioeconomic system, would be able to be strong. It would be able to be lively, and everyone would be able to get a piece of the pie within their own level. If one was, in the confines of a layer, I would say that it would probably be infinitesimal, or maybe even somewhat impossible, that they could get to another layer. And I want to call these layers tiers because each of these tiers was so, I guess it wasn't segregated in the sense, it was segregated, but it wasn't segregated so much so that each tier did not witness another tier. So that the lower and the higher tier to one specific moderate tier would have seen each other, would have witnessed each other, would have been inspired by each other, right? And I think that that's a lot of where we get this idea that it wasn't really a caste system. No, it was a caste system, but it wasn't so segregated where each tier was walled off from another, in many cases. So I call them tiers because they're corresponding to each of these socioeconomic levels within these ages of the Bronze and the Iron Age. And the tiers that made up these socioeconomic levels combined were called a caste system. So when a lot of people say that the caste system wasn't necessarily a a caste system that we would kind of understand today, that no one in this tier would understand or see anyone in this tier, that's not necessarily true. In this case, they witnessed each other, they could have been inspired by each other, but they knew where they stood. And that's what made it a caste system. And when we talk about, a lot of authors don't actually address this today, but when we go ahead and we talk about this idea that these socioeconomic tiers were were caste systems, but really not caste systems. They don't actually go into explaining in depth why. And so I had to take and go a little bit further and really evaluate, investigate what the reason was for this idea of not being able to communicate. Well, it was a caste, but it really wasn't a caste. No, it either is a caste or it isn't a caste. It either is a class or it isn't a class system. And so that's what I wanted to go into for this particular video. So now, according to the Dictionary of Sociology, Oxford University Press, a caste system, it says, is characterized by any and all of the 8 following features. Number 1, endogamy and or tribal ethnic marriage. So endogamy is basically marrying in and marrying within each tier, so that this tier here in this caste would not marry above and would not marry below. We call that tribal ethnicity. Tribal ethnicity, meaning that you stayed within your tier, you stayed within your tribe of that specific caste system. Second, hereditary transmission, so that you were given a place in a tier based on your heredity. Third, occupational transmission, that you are given a tier based on your occupation, based on your vocation, based on what you were taught to do. My father was a plumber, my father's father was a plumber, my father's father was a plumber, my great granddad was a plumber. That's kind of the idea behind what we mean with occupational transmission. Next, hierarchical ritual status. Okay, and here we go again with this idea that the Druids were in their own hierarchical, if you will, ritual status. The chief of a tribe was the chief of a tribe, and there could have been levels within each tier, but they still remained in that tier. Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's what they mean by hierarchical ritual status. Customary is the next one. Customary social interaction. And what this is talking about is, what is it that is customary, and what customs does one share with one another? The customs that the lower tiers shared were not the customs that the upper tiers shared. Next, Dictionary of Sociology continues. Exclusion based on cultural segregation. Cultural segregation. That if you were of one particular culture, you would have not been able to mingle, if you will, with people in a different cultural segregate. And that's what that is basically talking about. And that's what that exclusion covers. There are 2 more. Next, Exclusion based on identity segregation. Exclusion based on identity segregation. That is that if you identified as something or someone, you would have been with the same identity or those that shared your same identity. And finally, exclusion based on ideological segregation, meaning the ideologies, those philosophies, those things that you hold as true would have been more common ideas or ideals, if you will, with other people in your same caste, in your same tier. All right, so those are what Oxford covers as sociology as far as a caste system, and not all of those actually would have applied to the Iron Age and the Bronze Age caste, but I think many of them combined in a way do, and we're going to talk about that. So when I think caste systems, I think of the concept of a food pyramid, if you will, the original food pyramid, where you see the different levels you see until you work your way up to the top. And I think that that's pretty much the best way for me to describe the Iron Age and Bronze Age caste system as a food pyramid, because we know that the base of that food pyramid, those things that are the base, the bottom part of that food pyramid, are still on the same plate with other tiers, but they also know where they stand. Okay, nutritionally, that is. And I think that that is the best concept that I could give you of what we're trying to look at as we piece together this socioeconomic system of the Bronze and the Iron Age. Now, caste systems still exist today, where even moving out of your tier is highly improbable. And I wrote down that the castes that we have are prevalent in India. We also have West and Central Africa. I also say that parts of the Middle East still have these these tiers. In fact, even in the Middle East, do they still have black slavery still occurs in the Middle East. And that's something that nobody really wants to talk about, but it is true. And so whenever you have slaves, it's almost a given. It's almost a given that there are, or even indentured servants, if you will, that there are that a caste system is present in some way, shape, or form. And up until recently, I even think that France and Spain, maybe not over the past 200 years, but I mean, I would say that even France and Spain, that's what that whole idea of the movement of the of social democracy, or the idea of fighting for democratic socialism did. It tried to break the barriers of an identified caste system. Now, so if we remember that the caste systems are different from class systems, the caste systems are different from class systems, and they're different in a number of ways. Now, each has a benefit. Each has a benefit, and each has an advantage, and each has a disadvantage. And so we want to talk about some of that in this talk. Number one, the caste system is based on levels, right? We talked about that food pyramid. We talked about that food chain, okay? Where steps are within those levels. So think of everybody. So think of a stairwell, if you will. Okay, everyone is on a different step. You see the person above you. You see the person below you. You might even be able to interact in some way, shape, or form. So if you really think about that, I also think that it's important to understand that this idea of segregation, they're not walls. There's no wall that breaks apart the caste. Okay, so you are able to see above, if you will, the horizon of the next caste and below, so that you know where you are. Now, caste systems were implemented to encourage each person, and I want to talk about this, to encourage each person of that caste to enhance their ability. So in each tier of the caste system, all right, you would have levels. So for example, if, say for example, I was studying, I don't know, a wind instrument, or an air instrument, well, then there would be levels that I would have to do to master that specific instrument. And it would take years and years to master these instruments. Why? Because they didn't have the precision that they had today. You know, the precision of the instruments back then weren't, digitally enhanced like they are, where, they had to, each instrument, true, had very similar sounds. I'm just giving instruments as a talk here, or a talking point. But I'm just saying that you would then achieve higher and higher and higher within that tier. So it wasn't that you were just stuck on this step and stayed there. You were in this step and were able to have, I would say, there was different strata and levels within that specific step and on that specific step. The other thing that, that why this is very important with the Druids, because it enhanced ability. So when we say that it took 20, 24 years to be a Druid, and, and we talk about that, and so many people want to give up. They're like, wait, 24 years, and then they hear, that the Druid University is going to be a 24-year college. They're looking at it because they're so used to getting things right now. They're so used to getting things right this second. And that's why not many people can do YouTube videos of more than 5 minutes, because people just don't have the ability to hold that attention. And additionally, possibly not even the time. So that this is important, because this is why the Druids had to take this long to be Druids. That's why they had schools, just like, obviously, I'm sure the artists would have had schools. They would have been trained by masters of a specific tune, and Vates would have been masters in herbology. And these are just a few of the types of casts that we're talking about. But the other cool thing is that, the caste system in itself, while you had steps within each tier, there was only one real thing that one would aspire to, and that was what my father's father did, what my mother's mother did. And so you did what the family did. Whereas a class system, which is totally different than a caste system, is what we live in today. You don't have to do what your father did. You don't have to do what your mother did. Up until a while back, it was, especially with early immigrants here in the 1900s in the United States, kids did what the mothers and fathers did. If the father had a butcher, if the father was a butcher, then the son was a butcher, and the grandson was a butcher. And up until recently, and in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and whatnot, things started changing, where I don't want to do what you did. I don't want to be what you were. I want to do my own thing. I want to go to college. I want to do something totally different. And I think that that's where the benefit of a class system comes in, that we live in today. You don't have to marry within your own. You could marry anyone you wish to marry. There's no, segregation anymore. And that's one of the accomplishments of why I believe we have a true caste system now. So with with the difference between the class system and the caste system, understand and know this, that the levels, if you will, within one caste would have been ranks of a different class in the class system. So that you would have had these steps, right? And then those steps would have met objectives, and those objectives would have met goals. And that's how we move up in the world today. The caste system, the class system would have used ranks and not tiers, where achieving steps, I wrote, are ranks themselves. So that the more you put into something, the more you are able to achieve. But if you are not able to put in the time and put in the effort, you are not able to achieve. And in true class systems, one achieves a different rank. Now, I want to talk about movement. And the reason why I want to talk about movement, I'm going to conclude with this. But movement is something that was socioeconomic movement was also not true in a caste system, but was true and is true in a class system. In a ranking system of class, one can move higher or lower, dependent upon the outcomes of one's decisions, and not necessarily through others' decisions, as it would be in the caste system. In the caste system, one would dictate what you are. Your mom, if your mom, was a seamstress, you were a seamstress, the daughter. If the father was a blacksmith, the son was a blacksmith. That was it. And that sort of is really important when we start talking about this sort of socioeconomic movement. Because when we start really getting into it, we start talking about the class system, whereas in one class system, one has to endure hard work and time. You have to put in the work. You can't just look at a piece of land, call yourself a farmer, and do nothing and expect for things to grow. No, you have to plant seeds. You have to be a planter. You have to labor. You have to do work to achieve. And that was the idea of a class, and that's the idea of a class system versus a caste system. You still had to achieve different levels, but you were not able to move outside of your tier. All right. And one other thing that I found interesting, and that is also in class systems, you move downward. If you don't put the time and the effort and the work into something, well, then your things like merit, reward, and privilege become demerit, penalty, and setback. And so that is something that you really would benefit in thinking about as far as what the socioeconomic classes were back then and how they were not class systems. They were caste systems. Caste systems meaning that they were not class systems at all, but they also weren't so rigid where one caste or tier was totally invisible to another. That's my presentation for today. Thank you very much for watching. Whatever time of day it is, make it great. But it all works out. Est lemogui tase for tase e for. Thank you very much for watching, everyone.